Henry Kissinger, here to talk about what he had to say this morning and more on all of what we have discussed on the broadcast this morning. Our panel, and we want to start by congratulating Nancy Gibbs, who was named managing editor of Time magazine last week. She's been here on Face the Nation many times. Her colleague, Bobby Ghosh, the Time international editor. We also have chief Washington correspondent for the New York Times, David Sanger, with us this morning, and our own political director, John Dickerson. Bobby and David, let me start with you because I know both of you have been getting ready for this UN session to get started, the Iranians coming here and so forth. First, David, Kissinger seemed, I was a little bit surprised that he is fairly optimistic about this Syrian deal, that he thinks it might work.
He does, and you know, just in the past 24 hours, Bob, the Syrians have turned in the first piece of homework they were given, which was an accounting of their chemical weapons stockpiles. We haven't seen it publicly yet, but from what we've heard about it, it sounds like it is at least credible. Now, the hardest question then is what do they do for the next step when they've got to let the inspectors in, show them where it all is, and then get very much on this very rapid effort to disarm them. I don't know anybody who believes that Syria can get disarmed over the next year, which is what the agreement calls for. But as long as they are in the process, I think it's probably very difficult for them to launch a chemical attack on anybody. And so in that case, it may have a good deal of the deterrence underway.
And Bobby, let me ask you about what Dr. Kissinger said on the Iranians. He says maybe not right now on a face-to-face meeting with President Obama. What are your your Iranian sources telling you? Do they want a meeting right now? Where are they on all this? Are they serious with these feelers they're putting out, do you think?
Well, they'd certainly like a handshake, and they'd like more. But they also, David and I, we've been seeing more of the Iranians in the last few days than we've had in the last 5 years. And there is clearly a big push to take advantage of this moment, to present Rouhani as the kinder, gentler face of Iran, and the change in tone is very important, and it's not to be taken lightly. That having been said, I think Kissinger is right that it has to be more than language. They have to show some more good faith before they can get a meeting. I think there's been a change in tone from the administration as well, a little more subtle perhaps. So the tonal exchanges are where I think they ought to be. But now something concrete needs to be brought to the table. The Iranians have to show that they are serious. They've offered to help out with Syria, but I think we probably don't need them for that at the moment. The central issue is their nuclear program. What can they do to reassure us, the rest, their neighborhood, and the rest of the world?
Well, David, what do you think has caused this change?
Well, the main thing that's caused it, Bob, is that this is one of those rare moments where international sanctions have worked. The Iranians have seen their oil export revenue drop by more than half. Their currency has crashed. They can't get their ships around to a lot of places in the world, and they're suffering, and that's made a difference. Now, the big question, as Bobby suggests, is do we see a concrete change? When President Rouhani was last dealing with the West, he was a nuclear negotiator, and Iran had somewhere between 100 and 200 centrifuges running. These are the machines that spin uranium. They now have 18,000. They're not all producing. And the big question is, can the United States get off of its formal position that not one centrifuge spins and allow something of a capability? And can the Iranians agree to begin to dismantle some of what they built so that the U.S. can go forward knowing that if Iran ever did run for a bomb, it would have a year or two's notice? If you can get to that kind of thing, and you're hearing things like that from both sides, then maybe you could see what the outlines of a deal would look like.
Rouhani says Iran does not want and is not pursuing a nuclear weapon. Does anybody take that at face value?
They may not want an actual weapon. They may want the capability, the threshold capability to be able to build one in a short period of time. We don't know what President Obama's position is on that. He's only said he'd stop them from getting a weapon. We know what the Israeli position is, which is being a few weeks or a few months from a weapon is as good as having one. And I think that's where the president's going to have a hard time keeping his alliance together, which is stopping the Iranians from not only having a weapon, but having a short-term capability to build one.
All right. Well, Nancy, now that we let Bobby and David untangle or try to help us understand this, Iran's nuclear capabilities, I want you and John to untangle what's going on Capitol Hill right now.
Well, it's the same thing. Watch what they do, not what they say. We've seen from Speaker Boehner that he can't control what his caucus is doing. And in a way, the president can't either. This was really the week where the center collapsed. The president wasn't able to get his choice for Fed chairman through. Speaker Boehner can't control the suicide wing of his caucus. So if you were taking bets at Ladbrokes about whether the government's going to shut down, I don't think you would lose money. The White House itself says they think 50-50.
It really? Do you think so, John?
I think that it looks bad now, and you know, the John Boehner joked the president was willing to deal with Vladimir Putin and not willing to deal with the House Republicans. Vladimir Putin has more control than John Boehner does, and that's part of the problem here. I think that in the end, though, John Boehner doesn't want to shut down. And the question now, the thing to watch, the real moment will come. The House conservatives have gained control of the process so far. It goes to the Senate. The Senate will cut down this measure for continuing funding the government. Then it comes back into John Boehner's lap. Then that's the crucial question. Does John Boehner suddenly get the support of his conservatives again, or does he then have to go to Democrats and say, I will need your help to pass this funding measure that will continue funding of the government? The reason John Boehner doesn't want to need Democrats is not just that it will anger his conservatives. He doesn't want to give away that leverage. One vote you get from a Democrat, that means that Democrat can then say, okay, well, I want this, that, and the other thing in this funding measure. So that's right on John Boehner's head, and the choice for him will be shut down the government or get something that can pass out of the House of Representatives.
And my guess is that in the end, Nancy, that is what will happen. I cannot believe that we would actually shut down the government.
But
at this
then we just hit the next wall with the debt ceiling vote, and there the stakes are even higher.
And which leads me to the next point. We have wasted another, 2 or 3 weeks here. I mean, and that seems to be what happens here in Washington. I mean, all of these things are happening, but Congress seems somehow divorced from reality, and in the end, nothing happens on Capitol Hill.
Well, and it's on that point, Bob, that what we saw here in this split in the Republican Party is a little bit different from what we've seen before. The debate in the Republican Party has been between the establishment and those who represent the grassroots. What you saw this week was really members of the grassroots, Republican senators who were brought into office, like Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. He is a Tea Party guy, ran against Obamacare. He was saying this plan from House conservatives was crazy. Why? Because first of all, it'll never get past the Senate, this tying of defunding Obamacare with the funding of the federal government. But Senator Johnson and other Republicans were saying this muddles the argument. Obamacare was already unpopular. Now you're kind of grabbing defeat from the jaws of victory. The president was in trouble. Now we're giving him a chance to paint us as kind of totally over the edge. Their argument is if there's just a funding debate, that Republicans are on much better grounds. And that's the debate they want to have, but they've got to get this mix of Obamacare out of the way so they can go back to saying, let's just cut government spending. That's where they feel like they have the strongest argument.
All right, we're going to take a little break here and come back and talk about this some more in a minute. Amongst other things this week, big story coming out in New York Magazine tomorrow about Hillary Clinton. And basically, Nancy, what the story says is she says she's not running, but you know what? She is running.
She has been saying that all along, and everyone else has been saying, yeah, sure, all along. So in that sense, nothing has changed. But it was interesting hearing her talk about how much she is enjoying being a private citizen, and then you look at her schedule and who she's talking to and the pace she's keeping up, and it doesn't seem very private, and it certainly seems like it is a very
You know what I found interesting in the piece?
strategy.
It was also almost like they were throwing Bill Clinton under the bus on this. That this will be Hillary's campaign, and Bill will not play a major role in it.
Well, remember what major role he played in President Obama's campaign at the convention.
Yeah.
You know he will play a major role in this campaign. I thought another thing that was interesting in that piece was Hillary Clinton said, you know, running for president now, it's we get a president and then suddenly everybody's looking over their shoulder at the next president. And that is something that she suffers from because it's 3 years before the contest, but people are already looking to her. She has to deal with this question constantly. And there is a period where people might just get sick. We get kind of sick of people who are in front of us all the time. And even if she tries to sequester herself, everybody's still having the conversation. That's a political issue because people will get maybe a little fatigued, but it's also a governing issue. People now, when they hear President Obama speak, they think, gosh, we've heard a lot of him. Imagine what it would be like for her to run and then have to govern, having been in front of people for years and years as a candidate and so much. So for her, she's got those two balances with this exposure she's getting, whether she wants it or not.
I think that's a very good point to make. David, what is Congress going to be able to get to this year? We know we're going to go through this kabuki theater on shutting down the government. There are some pretty serious things out there that need to be dealt with.
Well, you know, you said before that they've wasted 3 weeks in this. You know, you could argue that we have now gone through basically the past 3 years without addressing many of the issues you were discussing in the first half of the show. I mean, the Defense Department right now is operating under the sequester rules. A few months ago, we were saying around this table we couldn't imagine sequester going on for a few months. Now the assumption inside the Pentagon is that the sequester will continue fully into next year. Now, is that the end of the world? No, but what it means is that you're not debating how you would try to orient the defense budget toward the threats of the future, whether you want to put more into drones or cyber or whatever and less into big old Cold War weapon systems or what the size of the force should be. Instead, you're doing these across-the-board cuts, which everybody agrees, Republicans and Democrats and certainly those in the Pentagon, is probably the stupidest way to go about cutting a budget rather than setting priorities.
Yeah, because it's almost saying that both the executive branch and the congressional branch have lost control of setting priorities for this country. How does the rest of the world think of us on this, Bobby? Dr. Kissinger said in that interview, with uncertainty, and that was certainly an understatement.
Absolutely, there's a sense that that important, profound events are taking place in the realm of foreign policy, and the American voice is not heard, or when it is heard, we're not exactly sure what America is saying, because one day the president says something, the next day his Secretary of State says something slightly different, and for the next week Congress says something just completely out of left field. There are important things apart from domestic issues that are affected by this. As we discussed at the start of this panel, Syria, Iran, these questions will keep coming back, and the president and the United States will keep coming into, over the next few months, will keep coming to very important forks in the road. And if he's distracted, if Congress is not paying attention, I fear that we're going to see more of this. The rest of the world will feel that America has lost its place as the leader of nations.
And, you know, especially as we get to the debt ceiling fight. Remember what happened last time in the summer of 2011 when we were there? Standard & Poor's downgraded us, consumer confidence collapsed, economists said it prolonged the recession, just the possibility of a default. If we come up to another of these, you know, midnight hour votes on the debt ceiling, the global repercussions of that at a time like this, I think, are very, very serious.
And you know, I think that the point you make is such a good one, because we spend so much time, and I'm as guilty of it as others, of trying to assess, does this hurt the Republicans or does this hurt the Democrats? And sometimes we forget to factor in, does this hurt the country? What kind of a shape does this leave the country in? And I think that's where we ought to focus more.
Well, that's why you had the Chamber of Commerce talking about business and jobs, saying to Congress, don't go through another one of these nightmares of either whether it's on funding the government or on the debt ceiling. Ben Bernanke, the chairman of the Fed, said the same thing. Don't do this again, because what's not getting taken care of are all the issues we talked about. Immigration is another big one that's not getting taken care of. But what's also not getting taken care of is the economy. Not only are bills not being addressed, but this puts a huge iron, weight on top of the economy as Washington fishtails all over the place, and that hurts economic growth.
Do you think this could really hurt Republicans politically? Because my sense is they don't feel they're vulnerable. They feel that this will not hurt them.
It hurts them only in this way. If it's a protracted and long issue and problem, if they're shut down for a couple of days, it might not. But what these conservatives are doing is filling out the caricature Barack Obama has been painting for the last 2 years when he said, I can't negotiate with them because they're controlled by this conservative wing. That's what you're hearing some Republican senators say out loud.
All right. Well, we'll be right back.